Karina's eyes snapped open, drenched in a clammy sweat. Instantly, she recognized the familiar surroundings of her own home, with Kostya by her side. Trying to avoid any attention, she made an effort to rise silently and leave the room. She dreaded the sorrowful look in his eyes and the inevitable question about seeing a doctor. The memory of it lingered unpleasantly in her mind. Just like today, the nightmare that had plagued her for years had awakened her once again. When she was young, after losing her parents, she never dreamt of anything at all. But now, as an adult and a successful individual, it seemed that the same terrifying dream had become a recurring occurrence. Each time she woke up screaming, she used to share her life with Stepan. They were engaged to be married. However, one night, he couldn't bear it any longer. He abruptly sprang out of bed, but instead of offering comfort like before, he began packing his things into a bag. Karina's trembling voice questioned him. "Stepan, what are you doing?" His eyes burned with anger as he looked at her. "Me, I'm leaving. I can't live like this anymore. Multiple times a month, your abnormal screams jolt me awake. I can't handle it. It's driving me insane." "Will you?" she managed to whisper. "Yes, I already am. You've been mentally unwell for far too long, and you refuse to acknowledge it. I don't want a wife who is unstable. I don't want to bring kids into the world with a woman who's abnormal." Stepan stormed out, slamming the door behind him, and since that night, the dream where buildings crumbled, volcanoes erupted, and a cloud of ash enveloped fleeing people, including her parents, ceased to torment her. Karina spent a whole year recovering from Stepan's actions. Every day, she hoped that the dream would repeat itself, but it never did. Stepan never called again, and slowly, Karina started to feel a sense of relief. Then, an opportunity presented itself, a chance to change her line of work in a new city, as the company she worked for was opening a new branch. Without hesitating, Karina decided to take the offer. After all, what did she have to lose? She only had a rented apartment, and her family's house, where she grew up, was located in a village nearly 100 kilometers away. Although her neighbor promised to look after the house, Karina had become so detached from it that even if it had burned down, she wouldn't have been too upset. The pain of revisiting it had become too much for her to bear. That house held memories of a time when they were truly a family: Karina, her parents, and her paternal grandmother, Rita. They had bought the house because of Karina's health issues from birth. The doctors had advised them to move closer to nature, and her parents, who were lifeguards, had agreed. But they weren't ordinary lifeguards. They were the ones who went on daring missions to save people from large-scale disasters like fires and earthquakes. Every time they left for a long trip, Karina would be baptized by her grandmother. She never asked them to quit their dangerous jobs, but she always prayed for their safety when they were away. Sometimes she would cry quietly when she thought Karina couldn't hear her. On that particular day, her grandmother had decided to make Karina's favorite pancakes with cottage cheese. However, as they were cooking, the news on the TV caught their attention. Karina didn't fully understand what was being said, but the sight of her grandmother freezing while watching footage of an erupting volcano frightened her. In that moment, the pancake that her grandmother was wrapping up unfolded, and the cottage cheese slowly fell to the floor. The image of that curd hitting the ground stuck with Karina, and she never touched that particular product again. Karina glanced anxiously at her grandmother, who seemed transfixed by the screen in front of her. Her expression was vacant, and it unsettled Karina. Just then, the doorbell rang, and she hurriedly went to answer it. Standing on the doorstep was a man dressed in the same uniform her parents used to wear. Fear gripped Karina's heart. She had been only 14 years old when she lost her parents. Once the man left, Karina's grandmother remained silently seated. Karina couldn't hold back her tears, overwhelmed by fear and hurt. She refused to believe that she would never see her mom and dad again. Glancing at the television, footage of a billowing cloud of dust and ash played, capturing Karina's attention. She hoped, against all odds, for a glimpse of her parents, but there was nothing. Suddenly, a loud thud interrupted her thoughts, and she turned around, screaming. Her grandmother lay motionless on the floor, her eyes fixed in place. Unlike being sent to an orphanage, Karina's guardianship had been arranged by her parents' boss and their family. Grateful for their support, they enveloped her in love and care. They even sent her to a prestigious university. Although they couldn't replace her parents and grandmother, their effort was not in vain. Most importantly, they refused to let Karina crumble under the weight of her loss. Distraught, Karina rushed into the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water. She collapsed onto a chair, struggling to catch her breath. Why did it have to be like this? It had been 12 years since her parents' departure. Why did these dreams resurface when she finally started dating someone? She sat there, lost in thought, her gaze drifting to her watch. Sunrise was approaching, making sleep seem pointless. Instead, she decided to make breakfast. Kostya always had an appetite in the morning, even if Karina struggled to eat. However, during their lunch outings, the roles reversed. Karina would eat heartily, while Kostya settled for a coffee and a sandwich. Their playful arguments about who had the healthier eating habits always brought laughter to lighten the mood. Karina prepared a delicious breakfast, consisting of an omelette and some sandwiches, before heading to wake up Kostya. Much to her surprise, he was already awake. "Hello, darling," Karina greeted him, curious as to why he was up so early. "Hi. I couldn't sleep," Kostya replied, joining her at the table. As they sat down for breakfast, Karina couldn't help but scrutinize Kostya, wondering if he had overheard her conversation earlier or if his question was unrelated. "How are you today?" she asked, trying to gauge his mood. "Karina, I'm going to my parents' house today," Kostya informed her. "Okay, well, while you're gone, I'll finally clean out the closet," Karina replied, masking her disappointment. Kostya didn't live with her, although he frequently stayed over. While it seemed that both of them were content with this arrangement, Karina couldn't help but desire a deeper level of commitment. At 26 years old, she had ambitions for her career and valued the concept of family. However, Kostya remained silent on the matter. There had been no indication that they were ready to take the next step after 6 months of dating. She couldn't bring herself to propose to him, could she? Kostya was the first to leave. Although they worked in the same company, they were in different departments and rarely crossed paths during the day. Time seemed to fly by until lunch, with Karina working diligently, even managing to take a short break. However, it seemed that Kostya had already eaten his pie and left without waiting for her. Karina hurriedly made her way to the cafe. As she stepped outside, she immediately spotted Kostya at a distance, engaged in a conversation with another girl. "Your girlfriend is missing from lunch," he said. "I don't know, she was acting crazy and running around again last night." "I'm tired of it," replied Kostya. "Why don't you just leave her then? It's kind of sad. Who else would want her with such a crazy mind? Plus, she doesn't even realize she needs help. And if you tell her, she'll just get angry." Karina took a step back, stunned by what she had overheard. She quickly rushed back to her office. Later that evening, Kostya called, as he always did when he didn't spend the night at her place, to say goodnight. However, Karina found herself staring at the phone on her desk, unable to bring herself to answer. When the ringing finally stopped, she messaged him, "I'm in a mental institution. Please don't call again." Kostya tried calling several more times, but eventually sent her a text message saying, "You really are insane." Karina decided to delete Kostya's number from her phone, and as she did, she felt an overwhelming sense of relief. She couldn't help but think that maybe deleting his contact would prevent the nightmares she had been having about their tumultuous relationship. To her surprise, that night passed without a single haunting dream. The following morning, Karina woke up feeling cheerful and rejuvenated. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she spoke to her reflection, determined to start anew. Well, she said confidently, it's time to begin a new chapter in life. When she arrived at work, Karina acted as if nothing had happened. She engaged in cheerful conversations, wore a genuine smile, and appeared fully present. She decided to skip lunch, thinking it would help shed a few extra pounds. However, in an unexpected turn of events, Kostya showed up at the office just after lunch. "Karina, can we talk?" Kostya asked with uncertainty. Karina looked at him calmly, almost kindly, and replied, "About what?" Kostya struggled to find the right words, feeling a blow to his ego that Karina appeared unaffected. He gathered himself and tried again. "I mean, what's going on between us?" Karina sighed, her voice tinged with a touch of exasperation. "Kostya, why did you even come here? You don't love me, so why should you care? Is it just for the sake of appearances? That's utterly ridiculous. You're an educated adult, and you're letting societal norms dictate your actions." Kostya stood there, at a loss for words. Karina's indifference hit him harder than he expected. Yet he couldn't help but try one more time. "So what about you now?" Karina raised an eyebrow, genuinely perplexed. "What about me?" Caustic, "Sure, I appreciate that you spent 6 months on some crazy woman, but guess what? I managed to live without you for 26 years. I think I'll manage just fine without you. Now, please leave. It's working hours already." Karina gave him a dazzling smile before turning her attention back to her work. Kostya abruptly turned around and headed towards the exit. As she watched him leave, Karina couldn't help wondering, what was that all about? The sound of a voice right above her ear caused Karina to jump. "Svetka, how many times do I have to ask you not to sneak up on me like a cat? You'll make me stutter." Karina's friend, Svetka, chuckled in response to the startled reaction. "Karinka, seriously, did you just break up with Caustic? Why aren't you in tears? He's so good-looking." Svetka mimicked her own words from the beginning of Karina's relationship. For some reason, Svetka had disliked Kostya from the moment she laid eyes on him. She called him a pompous idiot and refused to visit Karina if Kostya was around. Karina couldn't understand why Svetka couldn't stand him. "Svet, you're my friend, right?" They were strolling through town together. "Of course I'm your friend, who welcomed you, took you in, and warmed you up." Svetka laughed. Karina remembered how she had arrived in this cold and unwelcoming city, feeling completely lost. She had called for a cab, and Svetka happened to be the driver who came to her rescue. Svetka had taken her under her wing from the very first moment, providing warmth and friendship to the hapless Karina. "Why are you asking?" Karina inquired. Svetka stopped walking and placed her hands on her hips. "Because I just don't understand why my best friend can't stand my boyfriend. Don't you want me to be happy?" Karina was taken aback. "What? Me?" Svetka let out a resentful sniff. "Because he shouldn't be your boyfriend. He's not right for you. He only loves himself." Karina found herself having to calm down her angry friend. Sveta was known for being impulsive and sincere, always speaking her mind. This trait earned her respect at work, but also drew dislike from some people. Sveta was originally from the outskirts of the city, where she lived with her parents. Despite having a car, her parents bought her a one-bedroom apartment in the city due to their concern for her driving in the dark winter. Now, Sveta stood before Karina, towering over her like a kite. Karina pondered what to say to her. Should she admit that Sveta was right? There wasn't enough time for that now. "Svetka, go to work. Afterward, we can celebrate with a bottle of champagne, and I promise to tell you everything," Karina suggested. Later that evening, Sveta looked at Karina thoughtfully. "Do you have time off?" Sveta asked. "Yes, I have some," Karina replied, realizing she had been caught. She feared that her friend had something extraordinary planned again, and since Karina had time off, she wouldn't be able to escape. "Sveta, I'm not going anywhere." Last time, we almost drowned because you insisted that anyone who hadn't rafted on kayaks hadn't truly lived. Karina exclaimed, shuddering as she recalled the weekend when Sveta convinced her to try kayaking. If it weren't for Karina's athleticism, they wouldn't have made it out. Karina had to cling onto a log to avoid being swept away by the current, all while ensuring Sveta, a poor swimmer, stayed afloat. Karina had wanted to scold her friend once they were finally rescued, but Sveta just smiled. Well, we didn't die, did we? Everything is fine. What an adventure. You'll never forget it, Sveta remarked. It was an unforgettable memory that Karina couldn't shake. As she looked into Sveta's eyes once again, she saw the same spark of light that had captivated her before. Come on, no need to panic. I have no intentions of dragging you anywhere, Karina reassured. Let's just go to my great-grandmother's house. She lives by a peaceful lake, surrounded by a beautiful forest. There won't be another soul in sight, Sveta suggested. Doesn't she live with her parents? Karina inquired. No, she actually lives by herself. She's not even my grandmother, but my great-grandmother. I have no idea how old she is, but we should definitely pay her a visit. Well, I don't really know how to explain it, but she's sort of like a witch or something. That's why she prefers to live far away from others, Sveta explained. Karina couldn't help but laugh. Sveta. What kind of sorceress is she? Sveta looked mischievously and squinted her eyes. Well, Karina, if you don't pay attention, you might not even notice it. Really? Karina sighed. All right, as long as she's a good witch, and if she has a microwave, that's a plus. But promise me, if anything strange happens, I'm out of there, Karina warned. Karina felt grateful to Sveta. While she had always been strong, there was still a lingering resentment in her heart. Was it her fault that she had nightmares? Why should she be treated differently because of them? Would she always be alone because of her dreams? Svet, maybe I should see a doctor. They could prescribe some medication, right? Karina contemplated. Sveta scoffed. You should send your ex-boyfriends to the doctor. They're the ones who need it. No, Karina, supporting their girlfriends is not their strongest suit. They usually bolt at the first sign of trouble. Oh, men. Karina nodded, appreciating Sveta's understanding. It was true, she had been let down by others before, but having a friend like Sveta gave her hope that she wouldn't always be alone. Karina and her friend had been walking for an hour, following a meandering path between the trees. They had taken a wrong turn and were now lost. Sveta, you said you knew a shortcut, Karina exclaimed. I have driven here before, but it seems like I made a mistake, Sveta replied, frustrated. Karina suggested using a navigation app on their phones to find their way, but Sveta revealed that there was no signal in the area. Karina sighed. You should have taken the main road like I suggested. Well, there's no use dwelling on it now. The road ahead is overgrown, so we'll have to continue on foot, Sveta said reluctantly. No way. There could be wolves around here, Karina protested. Sveta joked. The local wolves would love to have you for dinner, Karina. Suddenly, Sveta's driving skills failed her, and she accidentally bumped the car into a tree. Well, now we're definitely stuck, Sveta said, resigning herself to the situation. They got out of the car, examining it from all angles, trying to come up with a solution. Sveta nervously bit her fingernail as she thought. In theory, if we backtrack a bit and then take another route, we might be able to find our way, Sveta suggested. Come on, Sveta, think of something, Karina urged, growing more anxious. Why is it that every time you're in charge, the simplest things turn into an adventure? And not always a safe one, Karina remarked, frustration evident in her voice. Why do you always have to yell like that? Sveta retorted. I know this area like the back of my hand. All right, then show us the way and how to get there, Karina said, hoping for a solution. Just as Sveta was about to respond, they heard a loud crunch like a broken branch. Both girls squealed in fear and quickly retreated back to the safety of the car. A shadow fell on the windshield, and the girls shut their eyes in fear. They cautiously heard a knock on the window. It wasn't a bear, as they had feared. Karina hesitantly opened one eye and saw a man looking at them with a mocking expression. "Lost beauties?" he asked with a smirk. Svetka searched and searched until she finally exclaimed, "Igor, we need your help." She excitedly jumped out of the car and wrapped her arms around his neck. Yegor chuckled and remarked, "Svetka, you're all grown up now, a respectable lady, and yet you still throw yourself onto everyone's neck." Svetka replied, "But you're not just anyone. Karina, meet Igor, my childhood friend and best friend, since we would steal apples and strawberries from Grandma Efimovna's garden." Igor took Karina's hand and smiled, saying, "Don't believe her. She was the one who stole while I watched," and then she quietly cried in fear around the corner. Svetka laughed, saying, "Igor, what are you doing here in the forest?" Igor replied, "The same question could be asked of you." Svetka explained, "We were on our way to visit Grandma, and we tried to take a shortcut but ended up getting lost." Igor raised an eyebrow and asked, "Svet, when was the last time you drove through the woods?" Svetka replied, "I don't remember. It must have been about 3 years ago." Igor nodded and said, "All right, let's see what you've got here." Igor took a seat in front of the car, and Karina observed him with admiration. He wasn't trying to appear cooler than he was simply confident and sturdy. His muscles could be seen through his black t-shirt, and Karina noticed a belt with ammunition, like the ones hunters wear, around his waist. She scanned the area and spotted a gun leaning against a nearby tree. Karina asked, "Are the keys in the car?" Svetka responded with a nod, and Igor confidently took the driver's seat. In just 5 minutes, he skillfully maneuvered the car through the forest. Before long, they arrived at a large clearing, with a forest on one side and a lake on the other. Karina couldn't help but gasp in awe. This place reminded her of an illustration from a children's book of fairy tales. She stepped out of the car, marveling at her surroundings. "What an extraordinary beauty!" she exclaimed. Igor gently guided her towards the lake, urging her to look. As he clapped his hands, swans emerged from the grass, hidden from view until now. Karina stood still, surprised. "That doesn't happen," she murmured. Igor reassured her, "It happens. We have even more incredible things here." He then motioned towards someone approaching. "And there's Semyonovna." The girls turned to see their grandmother hurrying towards them. She epitomized a grandmother, with a light-colored kerchief, a blue apron, and a long skirt. She could have been anywhere between 70 and 90 years old. "Svetotka, what took you so long?" "I've already sent Igor to find you," she said, embracing her granddaughter. Svetka pulled away, surprised, and asked, "Grandma, how did you know we were coming?" The grandmother chuckled. "Now, my child, would I not sense when my family is arriving?" Karina looked at her grandmother with wide eyes, and the old woman laughed. "Don't worry, dear, I don't bite. My name is Agrippina Semyonovna, and what's yours?" Karina introduced herself, and the grandmother suggested they go quickly, as the pies were getting cold. Svetka eagerly exclaimed, "My favorite, with duck." The old woman smiled and replied, "Of course, your favorite. Thank Yegor for bringing the plumpest one as soon as he heard you were coming." Sveta slyly glanced at Yegor and asked, "Yegor, when did you find out I was coming?" He shrugged his shoulders and replied, "Semyonovna mentioned it at lunch the day before yesterday." Sveta chuckled and joked, "They'll burn you at the stake like a witch, Grandma." Grandma laughed and replied, "Who needs me, old? Karina loved being here. It was so peaceful and beautiful." In the evening, she and Sveta went to the lake. Karina curiously asked Sveta, "Svet, who is Yegor? Does he live around here?" Sveta explained, "He used to live here when we were kids. We were really good friends. But then, when I was about 10 and Yegor was 15, they moved away. But now he's back. I don't know why or for how long. He promised to come tomorrow and make kebabs, so I'll ask him everything then. Why do you want to know? Karina blushed and replied, just curious. Sveta continued pressing. Wait a minute, friend, what's going on? Do you like him? She shook Karina, but Karina pushed her away, irritated. Sveta, stop it. What are you acting like, a little girl? Svetka, it's love at first sight, Sveta exclaimed. Oh, come on, stop talking nonsense, Karina replied dismissively. You know, for once, I actually approve of your choice, Sveta teased. Well, you know, especially since he seems interested in you too. Karina brushed it off. Oh, whatever you say. The 5 days off passed by in a flash. Karina realized that her fondest memory would be of Yegor. She realized that she had met a real man for the first time in her life, someone any woman would dream of. However, Yegor didn't make any moves towards her, even though Karina was certain he liked her. He made jokes, grilled kebabs for them, and even took them fishing. Afterward, Karina jokingly swore that she would dedicate her whole salary to the person who figured out how to get rid of all the mosquitoes. On the final day, Yegor decided to leave early. I'm all out of vacation time too. I'll be leaving tonight, he announced. But don't worry, we'll definitely see each other again. Karina watched as he disappeared into the depths of the forest, then turned to meet her grandmother's gaze. Her grandmother's eyes seemed to search her soul. Come on, Divanka, let's go. We'll have a chat and drink some tea, her grandmother suggested. Svetka, wanting to join them, was halted by her grandmother. My dear granddaughter, please don't take offense, but we need to talk one-on-one. Isn't that why you brought your friend here? Her grandmother asked. Yes, Grandma. I'll go for a walk by the lake, Karina replied, her curiosity mixed with a hint of trepidation. Svetka seemed to have her ears perked up, eager to hear the conversation between her grandmother and Karina. The elderly woman prepared some tea, and they both settled down. Tell me, what troubles you? Her grandmother gently inquired. Karina hesitated for a moment before sharing. It's nothing significant. I often have dreams, more like nightmares actually. It's the memories of my parents' death playing in my mind. Her grandmother nodded in understanding. How often does this happen? She asked. Karina hesitated again before replying. Whenever I start dating someone, even when I'm considering marriage. The dream always comes, I scream, and I wake up. They think I'm going crazy. They, meaning the people you're dating, probably don't understand, her grandmother mused. But what about when you're not in a relationship? Do you dream of anyone then? Karina thought for a moment and responded, No, never. Do you think it's my parents trying to communicate that it's not the right person for me? The grandmother shook her head. No, my child. It has nothing to do with your parents. It's your own subconscious telling you something. Deep down, you know you don't truly desire this person, but you struggle to express it. So you've created this story for yourself, and at night, when the mind rests, the soul takes over. That's why your dreams try to push away the person you don't want. Don't worry, dear. You'll find someone you truly love and want to marry, and the nightmares will fade away, her grandmother assured. You won't scream in your sleep because you'll be with someone you genuinely love. Grandmother's gentle words tugged at Karina's sleepy consciousness. Her eyes grew heavy, and before she knew it, she had fallen into a deep slumber. When she awakened, the sight of her aged grandmother sitting at the table startled her. Oh, how did I doze off? Karina questioned, rubbing her eyes. Karina, who did you meet in your dream? Her grandmother inquired, her voice filled with curiosity. You won't believe it. I was talking to my grandmother, Karina replied with a mixture of joy and awe. I felt so happy to see her again. She was just the way I remember her. Who else? Her grandmother pressed for more information. Our neighbor. Although I didn't know him well, I remember him vaguely from my childhood. He passed away when I was young, Karina answered, deep in thought. Anybody else? Her grandmother continued, her eyes now fixed upon Karina with an intensity that seemed unusual. Granny Sonia, Karina recalled. She used to live across the street from us. She passed away shortly after my own grandmother. Anything more? Her grandmother inquired, her eyes turning an unusually dark shade of black. Previously blue and light during the day, they became an unsettling obsidian hue. I'm not sure. I can't remember if anyone else appeared, Karina admitted. I don't think so. What did your grandmother say? Her grandmother pressed on. She seemed upset and told me to return home since my parents were worried, Karina recalled. And what about you? I can't remember my response, Karina said, furrowing her brow in confusion. That's good, her grandmother reassured her as her appearance returned to its usual state. Karina, please listen carefully, her grandmother began, her voice tinged with concern. I'm hardly ever mistaken, but now I fear the possibility. You've encountered everyone who has passed away, especially those you knew. However, your parents didn't come to see you. Karina pondered her words. Why didn't they visit? I don't think they belong to the deceased, but I also don't see them among the living, her grandmother explained. There's no connection that should bind you together. You see, they're not dead, and if they're alive, they might not even know about you. Karina couldn't fathom this revelation. How is that possible? That's something I cannot ascertain for certain. I shared everything I know, her grandmother replied, her voice filled with a hint of sadness. The next day, while at a cafe, Karina unexpectedly bumped into Kostya. Karen, let's have a conversation. Where did you disappear to? I left without saying where I was going, and it could have offended you. Kostya looked at her playfully, and Karina realized that her good mood from the trip was quickly fading. How could she have thought she loved this sweet man? Kostya, we have nothing to talk about. You and I made a mistake thinking we could make something work. Karina, my patience is not unlimited. I may take offense if you continue like this. Well, if that makes sense to you. Karina wanted to punch that narcissistic jerk. She smiled, remembering Setka's epithet. Kostya, stay away from me for good. Is that clearer to you? She walked away, leaving Kostya staring after her. What was wrong with her? So bold, so unlike her usual self. It was always the overly affectionate ones that annoyed him. Maybe they should give it another try. All right, he had to focus on work for now, but after work, everything would be fine. But Karina couldn't concentrate on her work. She kept thinking about what the old lady had told her. By the end of the day, she had made a decision. The boss spotted her and said, "There are no more days off, and even if there were, don't bother asking." Karina sat down across from him. I really need it. I really do. Otherwise, I'll have to quit. Karina, what's going on with you? Where are you going? I need to go home. Something has come up with my parents. It's hard to explain. Anyway, I need to be there. Will a week be enough? You're the best boss in the world. Karina rushed down the stairs. She had already booked her plane ticket. Now she just needed to quickly pack her things and head to the airport. Karina. Kostya, what now? We need to talk. I beg you, not now. Better never. Kostya grabbed her arm. You're going through a difficult time right now, which is why you may be feeling lost. But please know that I forgive you, Igor gently expressed. Go away, Karina exclaimed, attempting to free her hand from Kostya's painful grip. Recognizing the voice immediately, Karina turned to face Igor. In surprise, Kostya released his grip on her hand, allowing Karina to seek solace in Igor's arms. This is what it is, you men don't think, and you easily find replacements. Kostya tried to add something stronger, but upon seeing Igor's clenched fist, he wisely remained silent. Igor, I only have 2 hours before my flight, Karina revealed. A flight? Where to? Igor inquired. It's a long story, Karina replied. Igor opened the car door for her. Get in and tell me the address, and then I'll listen. Karina proceeded to share everything with Igor, starting from the moment she had seen the news on TV years ago. Igor drove her to the airport. And there, before parting, he kissed her and promised, "I'll be waiting. But if you ever need my help, call me right away, and I'll fly over." Karina nestled closer to Igor. "Just wait for me," she pleaded. He chuckled. "Yes, I've waited 30 years. A few more days won't be a problem." As Karina walked down the street, memories flooded back. This was the route she used to take to school, and the turn her grandmother would make when going to the market on Saturdays. Sometimes, Karina reluctantly accompanied her grandmother, as she preferred to sleep in on weekends rather than go to the market. Now just 2 more houses and a corner, and she would see her childhood home. It was likely in ruins by now, not due to old age, but from vandalism. Children often enjoyed smashing glass, and people would take whatever was left unattended. "Karina, are you there?" Igor's voice broke her reverie. She stopped abruptly as an old woman wearing a hat stood before her. The realization hit her like a wave. It was the neighbor who was supposed to be keeping an eye on the house. "I'm Aunt Galia. Hello," the old woman said softly. But before she could say anything else, the neighbor burst into tears. "At last," she cried, her voice filled with relief. "Who told you? They're going crazy. They've turned all the neighboring towns upside down." Confused, Karina asked, "Who, Aunt Galia?" The neighbor fell silent, her eyes widening with fear. Whispering, she finally managed to speak. "Karanovka, don't you know anything?" Panic began to rise within Karina, and she couldn't contain her questions any longer. "What don't I know? Aunt Galia, you have to tell me." But Aunt Galia was unable to utter another word. She only managed to whisper, "Run, Karanovka, run home." Suddenly, it all clicked in Karina's mind. She didn't expect her mom and dad to be waiting for her at home. In fact, she doubted they would be there at all. She picked up her pace, clumsily dragging her suitcase behind her. Soon, she arrived at the house, her heart pounding in her chest. As she approached, she noticed that the house didn't appear abandoned. The windows were clean, and there were flowers adorning the sills. Could it be that she had found some relatives? Surely she must have had someone. No one grows up with just one grandmother. Karina found solace in this thought. If Aunt Galia mentioned that people were searching for her, then surely they would be overjoyed to see her, and she would be ecstatic too. It's challenging to live knowing that you're all alone in the world. Approaching the gate, she noticed a woman sitting in the gazebo, perhaps a relative or maybe a stranger who had bought the house when it was empty. Her heart skipped a beat. The woman bore a striking resemblance to her mother. Could she be a sister? It wasn't an entirely far-fetched idea. After all, Karina had seen similar stories unfold in melodramatic movies. She felt a tickle in her throat, needing to cough, but the woman turned her head as if listening. That's when Karina realized that the woman couldn't see. She was blind, and in that instant, Karina recognized her. It was her mother. "Mummy!" Karina's piercing scream startled birds from their perches in the surrounding trees. Slowly, the woman rose to her feet, her gaze fixed on Karina and beyond her. "Karina? Karanovka?" she uttered in a hushed voice. Without hesitation, the girl rushed towards her, gripping her tightly, unable to contain her sobs. Amidst her tears, all she could manage to say was, "Mommy, mommy, mommy." The woman tenderly kissed Karina's hair, repeating, "My daughter, my daughter." Suddenly, someone else approached and lifted Karina into their arms. "Doka," they exclaimed. It was the final blow. Karina whispered, "Daddy," before losing consciousness. Late that night, they sat around the table. Karina awoke, disoriented, unsure if it was all just another dream. As the emotions began to settle, they clasped each other's hands. Karina's father began to speak. 12 years ago, we too found ourselves in a similar situation. Our mission may have been different, but in the end, we became dispensable and even dangerous in this place. We wandered without identification for 5 years, unable to seek help from the people. If we had, our lives would have been forfeit. Eventually, my mother's eyesight began to fail due to the trauma she had endured. We had no choice but to leave the mountains behind. He continued, we ended up in jail, deemed criminals by the state we once called our own. However, that is all a diversion. Half a year ago, we were replaced by others who had committed similar crimes in our own country. Things have taken a turn here. It's not the same anymore. My mom has already undergone surgery and the doctors are optimistic. We were searching for you, but in a regular way. They advised us to forget everything that happened before. Just yesterday morning, I discovered your town. I didn't have your phone number or precise address, but my mom and I made the decision to come anyway. We couldn't have found you from here. We've already purchased the tickets. And you? How? You haven't been here in 10 years. You didn't leave any contact information for anyone. It was difficult for me. I didn't want to. I couldn't. I sent money to Uncle Kolia to take care of my grandmother's grave. But your graves weren't here. I wouldn't have returned otherwise. But then I had a dream. My kind-hearted grandmother. All the people I knew who had passed away were present, but you were not among them. She said that you are not among the deceased. Daughter, I don't know if I'll ever get to see you again, but I'm certain that you are the most beautiful. Her mother gently caressed Karina's hand, and her father quickly added, Mother, don't doubt it for a second. They retired to bed in the morning, Karina in her room, and her parents in theirs. Everything was just like before, just as it was all those years ago. Karina messaged her friend, My parents are alive. I'll talk to you later. She switched off her phone immediately, knowing Svetka all too well. In the morning, she was awakened by voices and the clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Karina stretched and felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Thank God, she had never felt this content. She picked up her phone and turned it on. Messages, multiple messages. Svetka had called 34 times. The only text she received said, Igor has been following you. Karina suddenly sat up in bed, startled by a familiar voice coming from the kitchen. She was about to get up when the door swung open and Igor entered, chewing thoughtfully on a sandwich. Come on, sleepyhead, he said. Get up before we eat all the sandwiches. For some reason, tears welled up in Karina's eyes, and Igor was taken aback. Why are you crying? He asked. Suddenly, Karina's father's voice came from behind Igor. Don't worry, Igor. Women are mysterious creatures. They cry when things are bad or when they're happy. And sometimes, it's hard to understand what's going on in their heads. Svetka, Karina's mother, chimed in, Igor, why are you stomping around like a bear? Bring the salad and be careful not to drop it. Igor protested, Sveta, when have I ever dropped anything? Well, we all start somewhere, Svetka replied casually. Sometimes, Igor couldn't help but feel frustrated. Sometimes I want to slap you, he exclaimed. Oh, you've been saying that since you were a child, Svetka teased. Mama, Papa, and Godmother are arguing again. A little girl interrupted, excitedly snitching on everyone. Igor turned to her and teased, Aunt Marinka, Kalinka, Tattletale. Mama. Karina embraced the little girl and playfully made a fist towards Igor. No, of course not. Daddy's just joking, she assured her daughter. Suddenly, the sound of a car approaching caught their attention. It was Karina's father, picking up her mother from the hospital after her last operation. He had shouted over the phone earlier that everything went well. Igor scooped up Marina in his arms, the little girl who had already forgotten her earlier offense, and tightly hugged her. He then helped Karina get up. With only 2 weeks left until her due date, her growing twins were making it difficult to move comfortably. Through the window, Karina saw her mother stepping out of the car. Her mother looked around, touched something with her hands, and then her gaze settled on Karina's face and figure. There was a momentary pause before her mother's smile widened. My daughter, she said lovingly, I always knew you would be beautiful.